All right, good evening. It has been a little while since we've been able to do one of these live streams, and I am exceptionally excited about this one. We have some pretty interesting things that we're going to be talking about concerning a very historic regiment in U.S. history, and also some connection and crossover between the history of this regiment and ways that we can be new ways that we can be learning history through video games. And if you watched the episode that dropped yesterday, you know that I am now a professional gamer on YouTube with my one video game that I've played. But anyway, if you've watched some of the recent episodes of History Traveler, well, we just kind of wrapped up with a series on the Battle of the Bulge. And I don't know if people go and look at the descriptions and things like that, but if you do, well, you may have noticed that on several of the episodes, I put down a reference where I got a lot of my information, which was from this book right here, Alamo in the Ardennes by John McManus. If you watched a lot of my Normandy stuff, well, where I got a lot of that information was The Dead and Those About to Die by John McManus. John McManus is one of the most respected historians in the World War II genre. He's one of my favorites. Also wrote the trilogy. I've got a stack of John McManus books right here next to me. Wrote a trilogy about the U.S. Army in the Pacific, and recently has re-released this book right here, which I am currently reading and absolutely loving, called American Courage, American Carnage, about the 7th Infantry Regiment from the War of 1812 all the way through the Second World War. And we're going to go ahead and bring John in now and talk a little bit about the 7th. John, appreciate you jumping on here this evening. I can't tell you how excited I've been to have you and later Luke stop in and talk to us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, JD, I've been excited to talk to you as well. You clearly have incredible taste in books, in addition to your amazing show. I'm a big fan too, and I just want to let you know that I'm excited to be here. So yeah, the 7th Infantry Regiment. Yeah. This is a unit that, like, if you're interested in almost any period in American history, they were part of it. I mean, so, really, like you said, from the War of 1812 through today, 200 plus years later, the unit is still on active duty, and they've been involved in all of our wars, everything in between. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm currently, so I have to admit, I was kind of fortunate. I got an advanced copy of this. So I've been working my way through it and reading it. And one thing that I'm picking up through reading this book, it's almost like taking a core sample of U.S. military history just through this one regiment. And I mean, I started off just giving you all kinds of praise, but this wasn't even your idea, was it?
No, it wasn't. It's the idea of a much smarter person than I, my wife, Nancy. So the way this came about, this is many years ago. She and I were having dinner one night, and she knows that obviously that I'm a combat-oriented and infantry-oriented historian. And so she wondered if there was any infantry unit that had been in all of our wars from the War of Independence through today. And I thought, wow, that's a really intriguing question. And so I looked it up and looked it up and then looked it up and then looked some more and dug around. And I found that it's hard really to have that kind of direct lineage all the way back to the American Revolutionary period, because Congress really, de-emphasized or abolished a lot of the Continental Army in the aftermath of the war because of the kind of mistaken notion that we would not need professional soldiers. But leaving that aside, there was a link to when you have, a pretty established regular army in the early 19th century. There was a link forward. And so it just seemed to me, in looking at it, the 7th Infantry Regiment was just in all of them. And I thought, I'm a trained American historian and military historian. I'm interested in both. And it seemed to me that this was a way we could really get a good window into our own history through time. And the other thing, too, that kind of intrigued me about the 7th Of course, they've earned more battle streamers than any other infantry unit, second most Medal of Honor recipients, and then two, most of the old Army regiments either sat out Korea or Vietnam because they were either with NATO or they were in Asia and the Pacific. Not the 7th; they were actually in both those wars. So as a more of a modernist, that really appealed to me.
Okay, all right, interesting. So they start off in the War of 1812, and then progress into the Seminole War, and then Mexican American War. And before we went live here, you were telling me about a pretty moving engagement that they were in out in Montana. Can you kind of give a quick breakdown of what the 7th Regiment was doing out there during the Indian Wars?
Yeah, so
I missed the
basically,
Civil War. They're also in the Civil War as well.
exactly. So I mean, whatever government policy is at any given time, they are attempting to implement it. Like you said, the Seminole Wars in the late 1850s, they're in the Utah Territory because of the tension with Mormons. When the Civil War breaks out, of course, they're involved in that, most notably at Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg. But after the war, of course, they're a big part of what we call today the Indian Wars. And so that takes us sometimes to some tactical engagements in the 1870s in particular. So this isn't very well remembered, but they're actually part of the Battle of Little Bighorn, which that, of course, that's the 7th Cavalry. I know that can be a little confusing sometimes, infantry versus cavalry, but the 7th Cavalry, of course, is quite famous for that. But the whole regiment of the 7th Cavalry was not eliminated on June 25th, 1876. They were relieved the next day by the 7th Infantry, the survivors were. And so the 7th Regiment, then the Infantry Regiment, is part of that. The next summer in 1877, that's what I was mentioning to you, which is more of really a very, very bloody and heavy battle that the 7th Infantry Regiment fights with a tribe called the Nez Perce. And so, again, trying to implement government policy, make sure they're on a reservation where they need to be, and all this kind of stuff. So it ends up in a really, really sharp fight that goes on in August 1877 with substantial loss of life on both sides. And so that's just one moment in this longer sweep of this unit history, which is really quite amazing.
And they go on to serve in the Spanish-American War. And then they get attached to a pretty storied division in the First World War.
Exactly. So yeah, as we get to the end of the 19th century, they're involved in the campaign in Cuba. So we've all heard of San Juan Hill and the famous battle there with the Rough Riders and all that. But another hill mass that the Army is fighting for, really not that far away, was around a place called El Caney. And the 7th Infantry Regiment is really the key element that takes the high ground. And so later on, so 20 years later in World War I, when we stand up modern divisions, the 7th Infantry Regiment is attached to the 3rd Division, which, of course, fights famously in the Battle of the Marne in 1918 and has the title Rock of the Marne to this day. Yeah. And so the 7th Infantry, so in this last 100 years since the existence of divisions, has been with the 3rd ID most of that time, but not exclusively. There have been other times where the regiment or elements of it have been attached to other divisions, confusingly so, including like 1st Armored Division during Desert Storm, 24th Division Infantry Division mechanized during Desert Storm. And in Vietnam, they were part of a light infantry brigade called the 199th. But for the vast majority of the time, the 7th is part of the 3rd ID, and it is today as we sit here.
Okay. So kind of getting up to World War II, which we're all kind of, I know that we're kind of just hitting the high points of their history going from 1812 until now. But the game that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit, Burden of Command, is focused on the 7th Regiment in World War II. And these guys, if you look at Europe, I mean, there's all kinds of divisions and regiments that serve. Like, these guys are kind of everywhere, aren't they?
They are. I mean, they fight from the beginning to the end in the war against Germany. They invade in Operation Torch in Morocco on November 8th, 1942, fighting the Vichy French at that point. They're going to be involved in the invasion of Sicily, the invasion of Italy, Anzio, fight. They're one of the key units that goes into Rome. They invaded South France. They go the Vosges. I mean, through the Maginot Line, across the Rhine. I mean, and then of course through Nuremberg, and then to the end of the war, where they're the ones who actually take Berchtesgaden, Hitler's home, and the famous complex there and whatnot. Not the more famous Band of Brothers. So
hold up, that was the 101st. That was the 101st. That was the first in there, wasn't it?
Yeah, sorry, that just isn't the case. And I know that's one of my little pet peeves here. And there's I can get into that whole backstory if you want, but yeah, I mean, in Band of Brothers, the book, and then unfortunately in the miniseries, they make the statement, that they had gotten Berchtesgaden, they had gotten it first, and this happened because Dr. Ambrose basically just took the veterans at their word, and it's nothing against veterans, but they only know what they know. A lot of times that's tunnel vision, and a lot of people tell you we were the first to do this or whatever. You have to actually, corroborate that, and so. Unfortunately, that led to a lot of mythology because it was replicated in the miniseries, which, by the way, I love. But this is incorrect. And so the 7th Infantry Regiment got there on May 4th, 1945, secured the town, Hitler's home and complex, and then the tea house that overlooks it that became a restaurant later after the war. And so they were, they were there for about a day or so, and then they handed off to the 101st Airborne Division, which is, I think, something where the confusion starts. But this isn't, by the way, just from the 7th Infantry records. This is from the 101st Airborne records that I've researched. So it's really just a fact. And and the reason I say this is because I knew so many of these guys who were involved in it, including a guy named Sherman Pratt, who was the company commander that led the way. And I think, this was their laurel and they deserve it. And I realize, and I fully admit it's a little bit personal to me in that sense. But I also just, in terms of, you and I are historians, we like to correct the record to make sure that we have what we think is accurate out there.
I'm going to correct you there. You are a historian. I'm just a storyteller. So you're the one that's out there doing the hard work. Just kind of taking a little bit of a sidetrack here. Why do you think that is that the 101st kind of received a lot of those laurels and attention? When I was doing my research for this Battle of the Bulge series, I came across an interview with Anthony McCullough, and he said, "Hey, in the Battle of the Bulge at Bastogne," he said, 101st got a lot of credit, and then he kind of rightfully shifted a lot of attention to the 10th Armored. He's like, man, the 10th Armored was right here with us, and they fought hard. I'm kind of paraphrasing. But even during World War II, there was something about that regiment that seemed to grab a lot of headlines. Do you have any hypothesis or thoughts on that?
It did. And, I think that is very much to Anthony McCullough's credit, and it shows what kind of person he was, in my opinion, to say that and point that out. I agree with him 100%. Having written about, the race for Bastogne, there are other units that deserve a lot of credit, like 10th Armored, like you said, 9th Armored, especially the 28th Infantry Division. So why did the 101st get a lot of credit? Because they're an elite airborne unit. They're fascinating. I think we'd all agree they're made up of really kind of remarkable people and very courageous, and they did have an amazing record from World War II and ever since. And so. I don't think anybody should ever take that away from them, but I think there's a tendency, from the media coverage of the time to gravitate toward that story. And I think ever since for historians, and then once we end up in popular culture, with a series like Band of Brothers and how prominent the 101st Airborne is, I think there's a tendency for us that when we see something on the screen, we think, oh, well, that's got to be true. And so, then it's left to sort of stuffy historians like me to puncture that veneer, and nobody wants to be that buzz killer, that killjoy. And I believe I've seen this many times on battlefield tours that I've done with people, and they've seen every bit of Band of Brothers, and they take it all as an article of faith. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's just not accurate, and so that, who wants to be the no fun guy to say that? And so. So I realize that, and I fully understand. I also want to say another thing, JD, is that to the credit of the 101st Airborne veterans, they're the ones who first made me aware of what went on east of Bastogne. That book Alamo and the Ardennes that you showed, that idea really came from them telling me about it. And I'd always known about it intellectually, but not truly. And so I think that really a lot of these guys didn't necessarily want all that attention. It just happens sometimes.
You know, I think that there was a lot of attention that was given to those guys that they themselves didn't necessarily seek after. I saw an interview with who was it? I think it was Buck Compton, if I remember correctly, and it was like somebody's home video that they shot or something like that at like some public speaking event. And in it, he said, he's like, listen, he said, the 101st got a lot of attention. He said, but listen, the ones who I think were the toughest and fought the hardest were these infantry guys who were on the ground. He said, we would go in and we would fight, and we'd be there for a certain amount of time. He said, then they sent us back to England. He said, those poor guys were still out in the field. He said, I wouldn't have wanted to have been in their position. So
exactly right. Yeah. And that's to his credit. Yeah, and he's right. I mean, and that's the 7th Infantry Regiment is one of those units that's just, I mean, you know, they see hundreds of days of combat in World War II. So they don't get that surcease. And I think almost maybe sometimes as observers or historians or whatever, we almost kind of need that surcease, don't we? Like, oh,
yeah,
you know, give me a break from this. Let's go back to England and go to a pub for a while. This is because otherwise it's just, you know, it's just this grind of every day in this horrible circumstance. But that was what the war really was for most of these infantry soldiers.
Yeah. Is there a story from the 7th Regiment, and it doesn't have to be limited to World War II, that you kind of gravitate to that is, for lack of a better term, one of your favorite stories, or maybe it's an individual?
Well, there's so many individuals that it'd be hard for me to narrow that down. But you know, one of the stories that stands out to me that isn't that well known is the Battle of Cerro Gordo, which happens in Mexico in 1847. And this is a time, if you can even imagine this, you have an outnumbered American army fighting this uphill kind of winding in the mountains battle against Mexican soldiers who have a pretty good overwatch position. The 7th Infantry Regiment plays an absolutely key role in basically doing a bait and switch and outflanking these guys and completely overwhelming and destroying what had been a superior position. This, in turn, unlocks the entire gateway into Mexico City for Winfield Scott's army. And not as if the 7th was the only unit there. I'm not saying that, but they really did play the leading role. When I think about that today, I think about how you've got a situation where a small group of really well-trained soldiers at the right spot at the right time under good leadership can really do things that have profound strategic consequences for the better in this sense. Now, I could give you probably 20 other instances in the history of the regiment where something like that happens, including in World War II. But I could give you debacles too, because of course this is human beings, and you know, so by and large the 7th has a remarkable record, but they're by no means, you know, impervious to failure. I mean, it's all part of the ups and downs of our history, and of course the Medal of Honor recipients. I mean, my gosh, there's there's so many.
Yeah. So you mentioned leadership there, and I think that's a good segue to bring in our buddy Luke here. So, Luke, thanks for jumping in here and kind of talking about a little bit of a unique aspect. Now with this book, I mentioned that there is a video game that is involved with this called Burden of Command. So maybe before we start talking about that, maybe give me a little bit of background on your story and kind of your connection with the gaming world and things like that.
Sure. By the way, the official approved way to display this book is, in fact, only the back cover showing. I have absolutely no reason why I display this book.
No, I
the back cover. There we go. If those can't read it, the book that inspired the immersive Burden of Command video game. There, my team will forgive me now. Okay, I do display it backwards. Couple of things. So give you a little background, then on me, and then I want to say something about actually Band of Brothers discussion you guys just had. Mm-hmm. So my dad served in World War II. My mother also is a nurse. My father became a professional historian, history of technology, Thomas Park Hughes. And so I grew up immersed in history. Dad would practice his history lectures at the dinner table every night before going and teaching. So also another connection was my wife's a vet. One of my sons is a vet. Dad was a vet. So, the connection to the military has been very important to me for a long time. So how did we get connected to I'm trying to get my face is immense right now. It's a little distracting. There we go. How did we connect to cotton balers? So what the hell is burden of command? Burden of command is if you had one word, it'd be leadership. If you had two words, it'd be a leadership RPG. RPG means role-playing game, meaning you are essentially Winters. If you think of Winters, who starts as lieutenant, becomes a captain in Band of Brothers. But of course, in this case, it's the cotton balers. So Forbes called us Interactive Band of Brothers. I guess I'd have to tweak that and say Interactive Cotton Balers. You act as a company lieutenant and then a commander, and you must make decisions according to that role on and off the battlefield. And in a moment, I hope we'll run a little trailer or make all this abstraction concrete. I just want to say one interesting thing, I think, on the Band of Brothers, why to get all the tension. I agree with everything said. However, one thing I'd add, my dad was actually as a young professor at Johns Hopkins, I think, with a colleague of Stephen Ambrose. And so one thing is, what's the timing of the book? But the other thing I think is, I'm just speaking here, I don't know, but if I were Tom Hanks and Spielberg and I were picking a unit to follow, first there's a book, there's celebrity, but there's another slightly sobering reason, I suspect, which is, you guys alluded to their being pulled out of line, the paratroopers, right? Well, that means their casualty rates for their leadership is lower statistically, right? Yep. Therefore, if you're trying to create a series, you want your characters to mostly survive. Yeah. But if you were to take a cotton baler company, probably, or above, the casualty rate of junior officers was horrific. John, I think, can probably jump in and say something about that. So frankly, if you want a compelling TV series, Band of Brothers are probably better because they survived. The guys survived longer. You agree?
I've never even considered that point. Yeah.
Is that fair, John?
It's a great point. And the casualty rates. So to give you a sense of this, the 3rd ID in World War II suffered the highest casualties of any U.S. infantry division in the war against Germany. And that meant, an enormous number of fatalities that were actually larger than the size of the 7th Infantry Regiment would have been on the day of of Operation Torch. So what that tells you is, statistically speaking, there's a very good chance that if you are a member of the regiment on November 8th, that if you remain with the regiment, not only are you going to become a casualty, you're probably going to get killed. And that's brutal. 2.5 years of combat that's going to happen subsequently. So it's very different than the episodic airborne combat, where you might have a chance to survive, even though you have a very dangerous job, behind enemy lines and whatever else. But it's a little bit of a different animal in that regard. And the other thing I should mention too, just by explanation, so the nickname of the 7th Infantry Regiment is the Cotton Balers, because they were said to have fought from behind bales of cotton against the British in the Battle of New Orleans. Now, in my research, I found that probably wasn't true, and the reason it wasn't true is because cotton could, catch fire if it was hit by ordnance, and you wouldn't necessarily want that if you're behind it. But having said that, it's very possible that they used wet cotton, in their ramparts and in their fortifications, and so the nickname has stuck ever since. And it's a colorful name, and that's what Luke means. If you're wondering what cotton balers was.
So as the historian for the 7th Regiment, your first order of business was to wreck the story behind their name.
I know. Exactly. Talk about establishing the mood right there. Oh, God. We're going to kill all our myths, I'm good at that. I love being that killjoy, I guess.
Well, we were privileged to have John review early on our draft of interactive fiction. I have to tell you, after each session with John, we left weeping after he would destroy our latest hope. Okay, I'm exaggerating.
Not like my students,
Should we show a video so people know what the heck I'm talking about? It's just 2 minutes or less. And then I'll also give John a chance to talk about how he had influence on us.
All right, yeah. So let's bring up the trailer for burden of command. Just bear with me.
This game was out 3 weeks ago, by the way, so it's getting very positive on Steam so far, so people are being kind. All right, let's go ahead.
Tremendous.
All right, here we go.
Okay, pause, please.
Sure.
So, unfortunately, we destroyed the history there just at last second. But this is, I think, a perfect example. And so in the game, you actually get a choice that seems insane. And I'll let John drain the real history, which is you say, well, there's a sniper. You can't see him. Do you want to step out so that the sniper can be spotted? I think we all can recognize there's sort of an obvious risk there. Now, this is an obvious Hollywood moment, right? Only in a movie would something so absurd or, overly dramatic happen. But as you can see here, it's real history. John, do you want to comment on the real history?
Yeah, most definitely. So this happened in the Battle of Sicily in the summer 1943. And just in terms of the backdrop, most of the population tended to be pro-American. So the likelihood whenever you went into a town was that you'd be welcomed. But, there's still resistance going on from Italian army. Obviously, there's some Germans, but not in this particular scenario. It's mainly Italian resistance. And there's hardcore fascists and whatnot. So you can take some sniper fire. In this case, there's a sniper in a town causing some issues. And this officer, Lieutenant Colonel John McManus, fascinating thing, actually. He has a German background. His mother had moved them to the U.S. and he, eventually goes to West Point, and he had, here he is as a young battalion commander. He decides, what, I'm going to just use myself as a decoy and expose myself while my bazooka team sees if they can spot the sniper when I leave cover. Fortunately, McManus did survive. He eventually retired as a lieutenant general, many years later. So this incident actually happened. I love how Luke and the team incorporated this into the real scenario because it could have turned out very differently. So it could for you when you're playing the game. So bear that in mind.
You can be killed in a game if you want to play Captain America hero, without all armor, without a nice shield, you will die. So one actually is it gives you a sense of the tactical. So I have a psychology and neurophysiology background, so I'm very interested in the sort of human battlefield, like Band of Brothers conveys the human side of war,
sure,
on and off. And so you as a tactical leader on that hex map you saw, you can be up there with the guys, leading them, being heroic examples, and being a leading by example. And there are many vets, by the way, in the team, could advise us about these kind of ideas, as well as John's books, which we read multiple of them, so forth. Anyway, you can lead from the front, and that's all very heroic and wonderful. But guess what? Statistically, you will die, right? At some point, or at least be wounded. And so maybe you should stay back so you can control the flow of the battle better, not be suppressed. I mean, there's a scene in one of the Band of Brothers episodes where the lieutenant's just behind a haystack, essentially of no use to the men because he's suppressed. He's breaking down. So you maybe should stay back. But of course, if you stay back all the time, you don't, forgive my French, risk your own ass, then the men will notice. And so the game notices too. So you won't build quality in the game called trust. So notice I'm trying to bring out these human psychological qualities of should you lead, it inspires the men, it makes them do difficult things, but you may get killed. On the other hand, you could stay back, which is effective from a command and control, arguably. But then, they get the message. So maybe we should play a little bit more here. And the only other point I'd make here is, truth is stranger in fiction. I'm a strong believer in that for history. So our favorite moments in the game are to bring things up like this where everybody says, oh, please, I thought this was credible. This is ridiculous. And then we actually put little footnotes, often with John in a footnote, which are, don't get too scared. They're just a little icon you can mouse over, and it gives you the real history. And that's also particularly nice if you've done something. You can find out, what did the real commander do? Anyway.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
People like that.
Continue
actually.
on.
Yeah.
All right.
Hit pause, please. So this encapsulates, why do we call it burden of command? Well, because we really want to focus not only on the tactical, there are many things demanded of you as a leader. Tactical, obviously, probably logistical more than we care to admit, right? Getting the supplies and so forth, but also ethical or spiritual, right? What decisions will you make on the battlefield? This is what we call the sort of essence, that little one there, of the burden of command, which is men versus mission, right? You have a responsibility to your men, their lives. They're entrusting their lives. They're 18 or 19-year-olds often. I mean, you're cutting off their life at the beginning if you send them up that hill too much, maybe. On the other hand, you have a moral responsibility to help win the war, right? So there's that balance. Again, Band of Brothers, winners, late war. You may remember the episode where they're canal, they sent out a scouting party, they come back, and then, they survive somehow, mostly. And then they get it. Basically, the colonel or major or whatever says, do it again. And winners, who's about as upstanding a guy as you can imagine, decides to lie. Essentially say, we did it again. Why?
Yeah.
He just saw no utility. He made a command decision that the men here are more important than the mission. And one of the things vets emphasized to us early on, games are what often called power trips. They emphasize, go win, take the hill, you're going to do everything wonderfully better than anybody did in history. But as I think one of you said in one of the early discussions, real commanders often order that you don't ever say retreat, vet told me, withdraw, right? Because live to fight another day, because this is not working out. So we work really hard to encourage the player to think about men versus mission, not only explicit decisions like that. Should I detail some people to save the captain? But that may cripple the attack. But this is a late innovation. We have a men victory condition and a mission victory condition. Every game has, board game or digital has a mission, right? Conquer the 3, whatever the hex, take the hill, whatever. We don't know of in our game that opposes it with a men victory condition, which essentially boils down to casualties. So we're hoping as a player, you'll sit there and say, I don't know if I can pull off this mission, and I'm creeping up towards losing it with the men, because players are so trained that they must win. That if we don't give them some way to win, then they'll just probably destroy everything and be frustrated. So we try to articulate explicitly, you should take care of the men as well as the mission. And that is the burden of command. And we thought a lot about that. The burden of command applies not just to your own men, but for instance, there's a hill. John could talk about $1 Million Ridge in Sicily, where you get an overwhelming attack, and you probably should withdraw. But what's the problem with withdrawing there, John?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of problems with it because, you're going to have to come back and take it again the next day and the next day and the next day. And it kills the momentum of other units in sector. You've got superiors breathing down your neck. And you may have a fellow company that you've screwed now. You're giving the Germans an opportunity to flank them, right? So you have some responsible airmen. What about this one is a bit of a spoiler, but maybe not too much. And I'll leave John if he wants to talk about it more. Some of you all may remember the Highway of Death in the, I think, first Gulf War, where the Iraqis are fleeing, and it becomes an absolute slaughter because our American planes are destroying them. The first President Bush decided at some point to call it off from essentially a humanity standpoint, humane standpoint, as I understand it. But you could argue that was I'm not taking positions here. Let me be clear. You could argue that was a bad decision, also in the opposite sense that it maybe led to that regime having more power later. You could argue it was an ethical decision. There's a situation for the cotton balers like that. Do you want to describe that one, John, where you as a player must face what they faced? Well, interestingly, Luke, the scenario you mentioned, the 7th Infantry Regiment was there for that too, the Highway of Death.
That's what I'm referencing.
Yeah. Infantry Division mechanized in Desert Storm, and so they were part of that division as well. Yeah, I know. It's almost like anything we mention in American military history, they're likely to have been there. They were for that. So in World War II, they have a similar situation at a town called Montélimar, which is in southern France. We've all heard of the Falaise Gap and the Falaise Pocket in Normandy. This is a sort of miniature version of that that happens in August. And so, again, we've got a situation where are we going to go through to total annihilation of the enemy? Do we have that capability? What can we do as ground troops bring that about, or do we have a moral obligation to take these guys prisoner if we can? You kind of see all that come into play, and it's also too, by the way, horrifying for the soldiers who were actually there, because they're seeing what
even
this
if
really
it's the right
meant.
thing to do. It's terrible.
Just horrible death, and dead flesh and flames and all the rest, and in the summer heat. It was a terrible thing for the victors. Imagine for the vanquished.
So we're trying to do something there in these examples. You can see this is not going to be a description of a typical game. There are exceptions. Like there's an interesting one out there about the civilian experience in war called This War of Mine. But most games, I would say, are about war, or one of two things. They're what's called war games. And I like those games. Anything I'm about to mention, I like. This is not an attack on them.
Sure.
But war games tend to be very abstract. Oh, move the 3rd Panzer here. Oh, move the 3rd Infantry Division here. It's a little counter, or it's a little abstraction on the screen. And if you know the history, it's very interesting. On the other hand, it's dry as sin if you don't. Inversely, of course, Medal of Honor, first-person shooters. I remember the first time I tried one of those. Oh my God, you feel you're there. Incredible audio, visual. You are there, your mind says. But then you get shot down, and suddenly you pop back up 10 to 20 seconds later. Right. And pretty immersion breaking if you're trying to treat other as a game. And we care very deeply, and I want to diverge a little bit here and actually point to JD if you want to say something, about connecting to the reality and to the people served. My dad served. My mother served in a way. These vets have served. And so it's a respect issue for us, right? Not to trivialize and turn into entertainment what happened. And I think Band of Brothers I respect in that sense. So I think they did a wonderful job of that. And I think that's one of the reasons it was appealing. So whether we succeed or not, that's our ambition. And I think about, why does JD have such a huge following outside of, seems like a pretty cool guy. I wish he'd been my high school history teacher. But hey, no, sorry, Mr. Parker. But I think it's right, that connection when you're out in the field. Maybe you want to say something about that, JD, and you feel that connection across time to them.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of to your point there, I think there are different ways that people interface with history, and one is through the actual experience of walking the ground and being there, visiting a museum, or holding an artifact, or seeing an artifact, or something like that, and kind of getting that physical connection. And that's something with the channel that I try to do digitally, is kind of give that sense of a physical place.
You're there.
Yeah, and then you have people like John who are like really doing the hard work of research and going out there and gathering this information and putting it together so that we can understand like the larger context.
The record.
And then the video games. So, I mean, I've got 23 years in education under my belt, and one of the things that I would do in the classrooms, I bring in artifacts. So I teach in a rural area, so there are things that I can get by with that maybe you wouldn't get by with in an urban environment. So I'll bring in like a whole collection of guns, and from World War II, and I've got a British Enfield that has a grenade launching cup on it. So we'll go out to the track and we'll put tennis balls in there and fire it out. But one thing that the first time I did that, I had students who came in and they would, I would let them, hold the guns. Of course, this is all safe and everything like that, in case anybody's concerned. But I was really impressed with the knowledge that they had about these firearms. And I would ask them, I was like, hey, do you have one of these? And they're like, no, it's from playing video games. So before then, that was something that I would have never considered, but that was a gateway into history for these individuals, and they had a very respectable understanding of it that I didn't expect.
Well, one of the things that shocked me, I remember I have 4 children, and the boys came in one day and said, or how'd it go? I knew they were playing some Total War or something game, and they said, well, I was turtling. I go, what? And then they explained to me Roman shield turtling. And I really did not expect, like, I don't know, they were 14 or 13-year-olds to be explaining to me Roman military tactics. And I thought, wow, it really does have an impact. On the connection side, by the way, so I don't have a gun today, probably just as well for the video, but this, still sharp.
Wow.
Japanese officer samurai sword. My father got when the bypassed Japanese on a nearby island surrendered. And so, I keep it there as that physical connect. One other little thing I want to say, and then we can go back to video, is as a communication form, I think each of us has something different, meaning, the book is a matter of record and gives you distance and perspective and ability to stop and pause and think about the large, as well as connect humanly. And you just spoke, GD, of what you do. I think games have an unusual quality in the following way. You're in their boots on their ground, but then it's you making the decisions, right? So I put up those things in video, but you're going to make the decision. And so there are two emotions that games can produce that a film or a book cannot, which is, I would argue, which is regret. Because if you're reading a book or watching a film, how can you feel regret? You didn't do anything. Or, or remorse or guilt, right? Maybe I did something wrong there. So the writers, example, the writers put me in situations I've never forgotten because of the decision I made and somebody died and narratively. And yet I'm not sure I would do anything different, but I still feel remorse while not thinking I would do anything different. And you hear those kind of stories, but that's because John has given us this record, right? That we can make these connections, right? These to what we cannot give the experience like God, but we can point at it in the same way Band of Brothers could point at it, or you being on the beach can make it real.
Yeah, well, in my mind, like all of these things are not siloed; they're mutually supportive. So like I mentioned at the beginning with what I do, with making these little goofy videos and things like that, I relied heavily on John's work. I don't want to give him too much credit, or he might start asking for royalties or something.
We'll destroy all our fun ideas.
You'll be here for my lawyers,
yeah. and what my hope is, at least with the videos, is that people will see that. And then that will give them an impulse to want to learn more. Like, okay, well, here JD just showed me this spot in this 15-minute video. What else happened here? And then that will drive them to the book.
Go ahead. I give you a prime example. You're talking about, JD. It's a great point. This isn't siloed. This is linked. And so I teach at a university, Missouri S&T, which is just down the road from JD. And I couldn't even tell you how many students I've had over the years who come into my classroom and they have some base of knowledge about World War II or weaponry or whatever, and it comes a lot of times from two different things. Video games, like Luke was saying, like with his sons, but also teachers like JD who have brought history to life for them.
Yeah,
and showing them weapons, or maybe reenacting, or just going deep dive into a topic in the classroom. Yeah. And that stays with students, and it's the gateway drug, I always argue. And so then my job is to say, okay, let's take that to a brand new level now. Here's something of the other context, and let's see what interests you most. And, you go and you dive into it and see what you want to explore. And I just think that's a lot of fun.
Thank you, Michael. Yes. And I think that's the other thing, empathy. I'm noticing in one of the comments here, make that connection. I think that's kind of a sacred thing in the sense that, we're all going to be dust and ghosts someday. But now we're very real, right? But these people we read about in these books or, in the game, they were real. They were the ones who were in the present. And so to me, since I'm raised by an historian, just that connection to others, people who were as much real as us and deserve some connection as people, right? Not just abstractions conquering certain spots. So that's, I think, quite important for us emotionally in doing the project as well.
Sure.
Absolutely. You want to show a little bit more of the video, and we can finish that. So, these are not pawns to be used to achieve a tactical advantage in the game. Ideally, they're people. We worked really hard, like Band of Brothers obviously did, to create effect, to connect you with people. So our art, we think the portrait art's been well received. Oh, we shouldn't have left that part off. You never saw that.
Years in development makes it that much better.
Only 2 months. That's a lie, obviously. But we use a lot of tricks. So, for instance, we limit the number of characters that you get to know personally, because of course in a company there's about 100 plus. Can't realistically absorb that in a game. So you have about 4 or 5, a little bit like Band of Brothers does, right? Limits the cast. So you have your lieutenants. If when you're captain you connect to, they can be killed by your actions. But you spend time with them to connect. The art does it. The music tries to speak explicitly to men versus mission themes, like the Band of Brothers music does to some extent. We put you in these situations. You hear from them as different humans with different views about what you should do, not always agreeing with your wonderful thinking. And so a lot of energy. There's no burden of command if you feel no empathy for your men, right? Then they're just sprites. You move across the map and see if you can take another hex. But, we've heard from some people, at least, that they say, it's hard for me to play another game because it feels so abstract now on the front compared to this. So, on the other hand,
as we're talking, I'm gonna play just some gameplay in the background as we continue here.
Cool.
Let me find.
I wanted, So we can actually do one of those segments, and then John can talk about the history if you want. So which one are you going to do here? Let's see. Anzio Advance. Okay.
Yeah. So
you can try to turn me on. I can show up, and probably you get 2 minutes of it, and we'll put you in actually, let me do one thing along those lines, and we'll play some more. This is for the audience. You've been very patient, or at least I've grown on. The other guys are more interesting. But I'm going to give you, you're going to make a decision here, and it's an historical one, and I would love it if you want to post what you decide you would do. It's written by the writers, so but it is based on history. And the instance is called lethal insubordination. We use this when we were first pitching the games to ourselves and writers and others. Friendly artillery pummels the enemy. Suddenly your sergeant shouts the order to advance without so much as a glance your way, and definitely without your command. You bark the counter order. The men stumble to a halt. Your sergeant turns, bleary-eyed from drink or shock, and repeats his own command to the men. The barrel of his rifle shifts with a dreamlike slowness your way. Now, John doesn't get to comment on this one because he's heard this, but JD is going to be put on the spot. JD, your choices are shoot him before he gets my men killed. Obviously, you lose your sergeant. Sergeant, now is not the time for advance. And you have some chance of casualties or morale loss. Sergeant, I'm in command here. Knock the weapon from his grasp. You have plenty of time, like milliseconds. What are you going to do, JD?
I'm just the gut feeling there is option 3. Knock the weapon out of his hand.
Very reasonable, very sane. Historical choice was shoot him. And it was Lieutenant Spears. Some of you may know that history. And I think it's pre-Band of Brothers or something, or it's during. I lose track. John can get the exact.
It's in Normandy. Yeah.
He was acquitted. That it was justifiable. But, there's shock. I've never, in all the times I've run the example, seen anybody pick that option. And yet that was what was in history. Anyway.
Yeah.
So we can go to your examples if you wish.
Okay. Yeah. Let me go back here and kind of brings back into the gameplay. Okay. So now we're looking at the map.
I would probably start from the beginning of this little video. I'll give a little more context and then we can.
Yeah, sure. I'm back up here.
Once you had a plan. This one's particularly interesting. I turned my audio on there. It's probably better that guy read it than me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
Called Cisterna, and we're going to open a corridor then for the rest of the army to get to them. So I'm going to plunge in and be a player now. So you can hear the very start of that. I'm sure some of the audience knows this. Cisterna. The Rangers are trapped at Cisterna, and in fact, the cotton balers were part of the relief effort. Go ahead.
Continue.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Anzio advance. There's a glimmer of light in the east, throwing the hills into shadowy relief. You pass the word and stand your men too. In half an hour, it should be light enough to... A rip of automatic fire breaks the silence as an MG-42, that's a German machine gun, I do know that by now, having played, opens up near the distant town of Cisterna. Another machine gun joins in, then another. The pre-dawn haze resounds with the thump-thump of an enemy mortar, the bomb bursting before the town in a bright flash. The Rangers have found the Germans, and the Germans don't seem surprised. I'll probably get a choice here. Sounds slightly ominous. Mission: seize the objective. So you can see men versus mission for no more than moderate casualties. All right. So now we're actually going to see the map for this mission.
Okay. So interesting. Now, as you were like progressing through the game, is there like a morale level for your men that is kind of going up and down as you progress?
Very good question. So I'm glad you asked that. So many games, better than we can, emphasize exactly how the bullets and shells work and the tank armor and the penetration values and at the range and so forth. And we do draw on some legitimate systems for the armor side. But again, we're the human face of war, right? We wanted to emphasize the human side. Now, my background is psychology and physiology and emotional psychology in particular. So on the battlefield, I bet this is going to come as a shock. It could be a little scary. Most real vets say, yeah, unless you're a psychopath, you're scared, right? And so Napoleon said, what is it? Morale is to, I can't get exactly right. Morale is to strength is like 10-1 or 3-1. So in the game, it's all, you see those green bars on the units? You can see the leaders on top of them. Those are their morale. You want those bars green. But when they start taking fire, they suppress. And they start to basically not want to stand up. So I'll do another little test, JD. I'm just being nasty now.
Okay.
All right. You're standing there and I shoot at you. I'm the Germans. And you're standing next to a wall. What do you do?
Standing next to a wall?
Mm-hmm.
Gut answer there is try and find the other side of the wall.
Brilliant. You passed the test. That's what everybody does, right? Because that's sane. Now, maybe in cool hero game, you charge the enemy and gun them all down, right? But in reality, you're suppressed. You're getting down behind that wall because you don't want to die.
Yeah.
And so we focus the tactical. There's a guy called Dermot Rooney who's an advisor who wrote a wonderful book called Brains and Bullets, now called War Games. He really tries to describe these psychological factors. So I would say one thing that's frustrating for people in the game initially is every other game teaches them bang, 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 you're dead, which means shoot until they die, right? Even a lot of the sort of serious tactical board games, you just fire enough, get enough around, they die. Yeah. Well, not in reality, because bullets don't go through walls. So in World War II, it was something like 40,000, depending on estimates you read, bullets per casualty. I didn't say kill. So players would be very frustrated in the playtesting. They'd be shooting at the enemy, and they'd go red. They're all down behind the wall. But I actually lowered the odds of you hurting them as they went down behind the wall, right? Because they didn't want to die. But they weren't doing much. So what you should do then is you should ideally flank and assault, right? But you've got to now morale, right? Men don't particularly want to run across and possibly get shot or possibly get a bayonet in the gut. So you've got to bolster as a leader. You've got to get them to get up and go. I remember a wonderful, I wish I could quote the book title. It's about a captain in World War II, and they start with him. It's 1945. He's been very effective. He says, basically, come on, men. And he starts to cross the open field where they know the Germans are on the other side. This is 1945 in the war. And he looks back, and his men aren't following.
Yeah.
Right. And then the bastard who wrote the book made me wait 300 pages to find out what happened. Very clever. So I read 300 pages. So, but we do a lot of that, right? It takes a lot of overcoming unconscious assumptions of how you win things in battle, right? And so we emphasize psychology. Will you bolster your men? Will you rally them when they're hurting? John wrote a wonderful book. Maybe he wants to describe that. It was very influential on me. The the dead and those about to die.
Yes.
About D-Day. And John, this is something you can do in the game to rally the men. Do you want to talk about what the Colonel did?
Yeah, so the title, of course, comes from what Colonel George Taylor kept saying over and over and over at one of the worst points on the morning of D-Day at Omaha Beach. There's only two kinds of people going to be on this beach: the dead and those who are about to die. Now let's get off the beach. And this really has a kind of signal effect to some extent. What happens, at least on the 1st Division side of Omaha Beach. So I felt that was an appropriate title. I also found, by the way, it was not spontaneous, that he had been thinking along those lines for months. That's how you win an amphibious assault. And so here we have this coalescence of preparation and leadership, the right moment, and the human factor that Luke is so perceptive about, that is then reflected in Burden of Command. And then, by the way, we see it over and over and over again through many generations in American Courage, American Carnage, of the history of the 7th Infantry Regiment. We see sometimes leaders who emerge who do something of the same thing, just, different kind of battlefields. So
think of it in advance. Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You wrote it in a memo. You wrote it in a memo like October, November 1943. So he was already thinking along those lines even before before he got there.
Wow, that's a good leader.
Yeah,
one of the things we cover that John's book helped us on too is, morale, rally the men, charge, super, but remember also Charge of the Light Brigade didn't go so well. We try to cover the long-term psychological morale effects. So, back to the casualty rates for the paratroopers versus the cotton balers being pulled in and out. There's a wonderful book called The World Within War. It talks about some of the psychology of the soldiers. And when they first start, like the landing Operation Torch, they're like, we're going to be in Berlin, next week, and I'll personally capture Hitler. And then they get on the shore, and it's really shocking. It's not at all like the movies are watching in World War II. Where are the Germans, or the Vichy in this case, right? I can't see them because, of course, they don't want to be seen. And people are dying next to me. We don't know where it's coming from. So that's a shock. And so that's where you may see your first sort of, not PTSD, but what's called combat stress reaction, where people may go blind, like that guy in Band of Brothers, right? Who's not physically blind, but psychologically blind, or freezing or uncontrollable weeping. Things like that, because first exposure to combat. Then, hopefully they survive, they get used to it, and we model, as I can go into if you want, in the game, how your units react and your leaders. You start to seem very effective, right? You know how, when you don't freak out, you don't go blind, you sort of crouch down and do the right thing and flank and suppress and call in fire, and you're very effective. But there's studies, this guy Swank in 1946 on this. It's all sort of it's not a lie, but it's hiding the truth, because what's happening is gradual, not physical wear and tear, there's that, but gradual psychological wear and tear. And every time you're exposed to combat, it's something like 10,000 hours. I can't remember the exact statistic. Everybody breaks at some point. Yeah. So the men and your leaders are accumulating wear and tear. They seem fine, but they're not, right? If you keep walking mile after mile without breaks every day, and then eventually, late in the war, they start to manifest it, right? They start to break down again because it's being exposed. And then things like off the battlefield PTSD and so forth. John taught us a lot about morale isn't all dramatic gestures in the battlefield, even like the one on the beach, but sometimes we imitate again. Things John taught us, like sometimes are they getting warm meals? Are they getting decent night's sleep? I mean, I think we all know how I certainly become rather irritable without enough sleep. Can you imagine a low sleep forever in war?
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So with the theme of leadership, kind of being a central focus of the game, did you all have any other, did you reach out to have any other advisors or voices kind of speak into the game and give thoughts on leadership and things like that?
I'm really glad you asked, because I want to give them credit. So John McManus, of course, core is our sort of, in the Bible. By the way, if you try the game, you of course are obliged to buy the book, but do not read in advance. Then it becomes a cheat sheet. But read afterwards so you can compare yourself. Very interesting, by the way. I noticed, by the way, I can't remember who it was now, but somebody mentioned their relative. Was it Utweiler?
I want to talk about that
one. Standalone scenarios. Very, very, about it. Most people don't. Very, very interesting. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Sean. Yes.
Sean Greer. Yeah.
I don't want to say too much about Weller because it's quite an interesting fight, but I wanted to reference that. So, sorry, what was the question? I got a little distracted by saying Ootweiler.
Were there any other voices that,
yes,
kind
thank
of
you.
spoke into?
So, Colonel John Antle, some of you may recognize him. He's a really interesting individual. He was I probably get it slightly wrong, John. My apologies. Armor division or above, maybe corps commander. He at one point probably. Well, I just don't want to mischaracterize it, but that his experience was armored. He also very interesting. He's written a lot of books on leadership. He was so generous with his time. He just kept volunteering time to help me and guide me, like John did. He also, some of you, if any of you are gamers, there's a game that's somewhat fabled called Brothers in Arms, which is a first-person shooter, but quite credible. And it also emphasizes things like suppression and so forth. And there are other ones. I don't want to overcharacterize. Like there's one, Hell Let Loose. I know that they try to do a lot of the command and control. It depends on the game. But nice, Pyrrhus, very good. We do some quotes. Yes, very good. Pyrrhic victory. Yes. He was executive producer for Brothers in Arms. So that's one of the reasons they were credible. He also did interesting. Here's for those of you who don't want to go play a digital game, this is a book he did. John, I'm going to need John Anton, I'm going to need a commission now. Armor Attacks. This is essentially like a burden of command, but it's text and very credibly done on his own experiences. So John Antle, Dermot Rooney, I alluded to. He was probably our Bible for tactical and combat psychology. Things like for instance, when do units make what we call morale check decision, where the units in the game may not do what you order them to do. Like you order them run across in the open under fire against an unsuppressed MG-42. If they're sane, they should think twice about it, or they should at least they'll do lip service. Oh yes, sir. Oh geez, strangely enough, I fell down behind this rock as I was advancing, right? Because we're humans. So those are morale checks. He gave us, sort of statistics on what's the worst morale check? Doing assault, in his view. This Dermot Rooney, and that's where leaders come in. I don't want to go on. I can drain that one, but things like what are the key morale checks, which apply in like Napoleonic combat. So first check is, French Guard or whatever. Are you an Imperial Guard? Are you going to pass your morale check to charge the British who are going to stand there while you run across and shoot you down? Morale check. Now you pass. You're maybe, but they didn't always, right? The Imperial Guard. You're getting close to the Wellington's troops. Wellington troops are saying, gee, do I really want to stay here and get a bayonet in the stomach? I'm thinking twice. And then they do a morale check as whether they're going to stay. And we do that in Burn to Command. So anyway, Dermot Rooney's book, I really encourage you to read that. Let's see, William Bernhardt. He's a novelist who 20 million, his books, legal sort of thrillers, have sold 20 million copies. He came early on and advised us on how to write empathetic, engaging writing. So the trick, for example, is on the landing a torch in the game. The written descriptions will be things like the vomit washes around the bottom of the landing craft. That's not very romantic. Not quite how we expected our non-Band of Brothers heroic movies to go, right? But
very true.
But the smell, right? The grit under your feet. He encouraged very concrete physical details to put the person there. Now, our writers are good. They come from Choice of Games, which is sex games, but they learned from him. Let's see, I'm going to forget somebody, and now I'm going to be ashamed, but our team page for Burn the Command, let's see, the writing, the Dermot, art advice. We went through a lot of iterations to get Amar Kozak. He does the portraits for not Band of Brothers. I've got that in the brain now. Total War series. Okay. We couldn't afford him, but he really likes what we're doing. He's a reenactor, by the way, John. And so he did tons of portraits for us that are unusual and human. I have pushed him to not just do heroic, right? Like most games, but people you can imagine are people, right? And of all types. Like there's a female French resistance leader based on history, but she isn't a gorgeous beauty. She's a person, and some of your lieutenants aren't handsome dudes who are going to crush everything. They might be your neighbor, and before you went to war as a civilian soldier.
Sure. So I mean, obviously there's a lot of layers and a lot of depth to this game that I think sets it apart and makes it unique. And then also, having a game that is directly connected to a book, at least to my knowledge, is something that hasn't been done. At least
That
not.
may be unique. We can't. Somebody in the audience may think of it. We haven't thought of a game yet directly inspired by a book.
Okay, so John, let me ask you one more question, kind of connected to the game, and then we'll go back to that earlier question. This to me, I mean, maybe I'm wrong here. This seems like something that would be useful not only for people who are military history enthusiasts, but maybe in like an ROTC program or an officer training school. Am I off base there?
Good question.
No, absolutely right. It's a leadership dilemma, any kind of leadership, military otherwise, because it's about decisions, it's about establishing relationships, forging human empathy. Like we've said, it's all those things that are going to come up, no matter what walk of life you happen to be involved in. Of course, it's at its most serious in a military and combat setting. But I think this could be a very useful exercise, burden of command, and for ROTC cadets and really anybody who aspires to any kind of leadership, at no matter where. I also think, of course, it's like any good historian. I think you really have to learn lessons by learning from the past, by not making the mistakes other people made, or vice versa. I mean, it's just, to me, that's just common sense. And so what I like about this sort of marriage we have between American Courage and American Carnage and Burden of Command is that it allows us to experience that on a lot of different levels. To get that historical base point and record, and I like to try and tell the human story. I mean, that's what interests me. Sure. Is just the everyday people, and what makes them tick, and what we can learn, and then this role playing immersion game in which you can kind of be them on some level, and so I think you learn lessons one way or the other, and I think maybe that's the value.
What, and I don't know. Oh wow, we're so original. We thought of this. Actually, the military's been doing a long time, right? They think they call them decision games. They'll take you on the battlefield of Gettysburg, or I bet Jade. I don't know if you do any tours on it, Jonathan. Right? You put people in the situation to have them think, what would you do? Right? Are you going to charge across with Pickett? At Gettysburg? I saw somebody alluding to. I didn't know that the 7th was in the wheat field. That's pretty cool.
They were.
Quick anecdote on leadership. So a book that influenced us, or me, was Battle Leadership, Captain Adolph von Schell, short little book. And actually a Marine major came in early on and helped us, recommended it. I already recommended it. The guy was a German lieutenant or captain, something like that, in World War I. Then he became a Panzer division or corps commander in World War II. He taught at was it Quantico or something like that? It's been quite a few years.
Probably.
But the anecdote that survives for me from his book, among many, was when I learned. I came in business. I was a research director for Accenture for a while. And I thought, I had all these theories. I know how to do leadership art. I imagined from being an academic, reading books. No. First thing I learned, probably the deepest leadership thing I learned, was forget most abstractions. They're wrong. The one thing I will say is true, and he does a wonderful anecdote in this, is everybody's different. So my personal experience was one person needed micromanagement. Another person wanted to kill me for micromanaging them. Yeah. Right? Somebody else needed in between. So his example in battle leadership, he said, I had 3 commanders. This is in World War I. He said, I can't remember the name of the commanders, but it's a great story. Like when this guy came up, he wanted to be told exactly what to do and would be upset. And, his morale would be bad if he didn't know exactly. The next guy, like I experienced, sure as hell didn't want you to tell him what to do. So he gave him general guidelines. And the third guy I loved. The guy said he knew that whatever he proposed to the third guy, he would, as a matter of honor or arrogance, to have to tell him why it was wrong and what he wasn't going to do it, and here's what he was going to do. And so he would deliberately put up a plan he didn't want to happen with that guy because his personality was different, right? That's not exactly follow rigid rules of do A, B, C. Everybody's different. Everybody
know your people.
There, I think, knows that.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, John, do you want to tackle this question here?
Yeah, I really do. For Sean, thank you for answering the question. I'm very moved, by the way, that your father was a POW in the Battle of Luttweiler. So this happens in March 1945. It's toward the end of the war. And, of course, it's important to bear in mind that by now the regiment has turned over many times over all these battlefields, from Ottweiler in sort of the western part of Germany all the way back to North Africa. And so you have in that circumstance a battalion that kind of gets itself in a tight bind in that town. And there's a whole series of mishaps and miscoordinations as a result of in an attack that the regiment is launching, but as a result of mines on the road and enemy shelling, and also the presence of some SS units that were not necessarily supposed to be there. And so one of these battalions gets basically cornered in the town and surrounded and more or less cut off and destroyed the better part of it. Now, of course, some of them do get away. Some of them hunker down and are not captured, and then the Americans come and take the town later. But the regiment loses the better part of a battalion's worth of combat power as a result of that. Some of these soldiers tried to hide in potato cellars, even trying to burrow into piles of potatoes to keep from being captured. Others were rousted out and rooted out. Others were killed in the streets as they fought very hard. It was a mixture, and it's not as if the majority were killed, but a substantial number were taken POW, and that meant, probably many weeks of privation in being moved around Germany, and maybe even getting into a POW camp or not. It just kind of depended. So it's just one of those examples of how in combat anything can happen. The regiment was a very high quality unit, but they weren't impervious to having these debacles. This is an enemy that gets a vote. And even at that late stage of the war, enough of them were willing to fight hard that you could have that kind of circumstance. So yeah, I really appreciate you mentioning that in the the comment and the question. It's one of the more downbeat parts of the World War II chapters, certainly, but these things happen.
Well, that's the interaction between John and me. That's one reason we put it in. And now that John's given a spoiler, which is okay because the history is more important. There's a lot to the game.
It is.
We put that deliberately in to teach. It was in our demo early on. We had a demo for the power trip players who are all trained. You can win if you're just clever enough, but you can't win. Sometimes we're spoiling now. You can't win at Weiler, no matter how clever you are. So the real leadership decision in that scenario is to realize that sufficiently soon, and to order withdrawal, which is an unnatural act for a gamer. But we're trying to teach them to think that way, because you never know. Germans aren't interested in making the battles fair. Quite the opposite. So you don't know if it's going to be fair.
Yeah, I heard the phrase one time that if you find yourself in a fair fight, you're in the wrong fight.
Very well said. Yeah, that's good.
So where can people find this game?
I am grateful you asked that. Steam. If you see it, it's also, I'll give my little spiel. We're small. Yes, lots of volunteers. Lots of volunteer vets, lots of other volunteers, lots of people who play the game and want to make it happen. If you want to succeed, please, consider getting the game, because we'd like to do more. In fact, we'd like to cover some of our periods that John has. We think the combat model we have could cover from about late World War I, when they start doing stormtrooper tactics, up to Vietnam. And of course, Vietnam would be very interesting on the burden of command. Also, we're doing our next campaign, which is not announced, is a non-US one. And I would just posit it an obvious thing that the burden of command inside a totalitarian regime, like a German or Soviet, would be very complex, right? So, for instance, late war. What is your responsibility as a ethical German fighting in the Wehrmacht? Is your responsibility to start surrendering because you realize you're on the wrong side now, where the baddies, as that little comedy thing does, or maybe your men, you need to keep them alive, so you got to keep trying to keep alive, or maybe you're just an officer and you have a Prussian obligation. Those aren't obvious. Americans had honestly a sort of easier spiritual path, in the sense it was pretty clear that it was a good thing to do. Right? It's not an ambiguous war, but many wars are ambiguous. I'm interested in Spanish Civil War. That's an ugly civil war. Boy, both sides are awful. Frankly, maybe one's a little worse, but boy, both sides are awful. You're supposed to, it's the wonderful Republic. I mean, a lot of awful things happen. So what if you're commander in that? It's just tricky. Bomb dealers are easy burden of command. Not that it's easy, right? But all these other situations, very subtle. Korean War. So we can't do it, if we don't succeed. We've got very positive reviews so far, but we don't have big budgets, so we love support.
Yeah,
I think
awesome.
I've begged enough. We're cheap.
Buy the
We're
game.
cheap
That's
too,
the
just like me. Rent me out.
Buy the game and buy the book. Your life will be as
Exactly.
great as you can
Thank
possibly
you. What I
imagine.
should have said. And watch JD's channel. I'm such
Exactly.
a My
That's what'll be
backup
the
career,
capstone of the whole
used
thing.
car salesman.
John, the re-release of this book, was it a couple days ago?
Yeah, just a couple days ago. So
Very
so
good.
American Courage, American Carnage is out. You can get it at all the usual e-tailers.
Inspired the game.
The
I only
command.
use
Get it
it.
together.
I
We should
only
bundle. Actually, we should bundle. And and then there'll be another volume later this year in December, called Combat in an Age of Terror, which covers the 7th Infantry from Korea through Iraq.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Well, yeah, like I said, I got an advanced copy of it, and I'm part way through it, and I am loving every bit of it, and I'm learning a lot of new things because there are areas of American military history where I just don't know a lot, and yeah, it's helping me to kind of round things out. So
Come on, JD, it's only infinite.
Yeah.
All American military history.
Oh man. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you guys jumping on and spending a little time talking to us this evening.
You're very kind.
Thanks for having us.
John, always
Thanks.
a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, audience.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. So there you go. That is a little bit on the book American Courage, American Carnage, and the accompanying game that is connected to it, Burden of Command. So go and check those out. And while you're at it, there's not a book that John has written that I wouldn't recommend. Like all of his stuff is top notch. He is by far one of my favorite authors and historians when it comes to the Second World War. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and hop off here, be watching for another live stream, and of course, new episodes of History Traveler and American Artifact. Appreciate the support and for hanging out with us this evening.